Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Before I introduce the guest, here's a quote just for this episode. Had I not been Alexander, I should have liked to be Diogenes, Alexander the Great. Today, the one and only me as guest and my dear friend Tony Capullo as interviewer. This is part two of our interview series, and I'll just let my main man take it from here.
Hey, good morning, Culture Matters podcast, and good morning, Jay. So this is part two, like you said, and part one was phenomenal. So we decided to go to part two, and most likely there'll be a part three. This is going to be like a mini series, right? So the Jay Doran Culture Matters mini series. So I want to jump right in for the sake of time with listeners. So I want to ask you, I want to jump in about Culture Matters itself and in the company. My first question, because I was thinking about this on Friday as I was flying back from Colorado. Since the pandemic, right? Since the pandemic, which is 2020, what changes have you seen in companies with regard to culture? And has the pandemic affected the culture?
I think that the pandemic has revealed cultures. If we talk in a business context, it's going to pressure, conflict, external, is going to reveal where people are, how they actually feel about what it is they do. Are the employees actually bought in? Are the employers and or leadership bought in? It's going to reveal the cultural crack. So in really high times where there's an implicit entitlement to success, things are just going really well, and then boom, we get whacked over the head with something we didn't expect, and it disrupts equilibrium. And it will reveal, is the company, for example, communicating at a high level already, or were they taking that for granted? So I want to just move the conversation, at least the general macro cultural conversation, to, I think the pandemic as an example, and then conflict external in general reveals the culture. It reveals the culture. What is culture? It's how people interact, how people relate to one another. It's people. So the people are going to show you with their bodies, with their physicality, with what's unsaid. Are they bought in? And I think to add to that, the virtual world that we're in the midst of figuring out. Are we in one? When will we be in one? Is proximity, like, is gathering still important? Those big questions. I think they are, and people are unsure of how to gather again. I can keep going on, but essentially the main point is culture is revealed.
Okay, so you said crisis. You just said, you answered one. You're going down the path that I'm going. You said culture it's revealed how they interact, and so I'm looking at my notes. So now with pandemic, people, they're not in the same building all the time. In fact, most people work remotely, right? So people working from home, right? Everybody's scattered, right? Even like big companies like Ascension, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and those companies, right? But I'm just using an example. So when people are not in the same, they'll go from being in the same building where they're communicating to interacting face to face. Now the culture has taken on a different dynamic because everybody's scattered. So can you touch on that? Because how does that affect? Because if you have, let's just say 25 people in the same building, and now 25 people working from home, one, how does that affect the culture? Two, how is the culture? How do you sustain a good culture when everybody's, people working in their pajamas, and right? They get right. I mean, so can you touch on that for me?
Think of it like this Zoom meeting we're having. It takes even more awareness and presence and intention. It's a challenge or a call to our character to connect at the level that we'd implicitly or below awareness connect if we were in person. You have to be hyper intentional to connect even close to the same level or at the same level or beyond the same level virtually than in person. So it's a challenge to character. It's a challenge to groups. That's why, first of all, let's say there's a group of people that really, they're on the same page. They're honest with one another. They feel safe enough to be honest. And by the way, that feeling of safety is below awareness. Generally, it's influenced by how the company creates that safety, at the top and throughout the system. At what level are the people that make up the group communicating with one another with honesty, with transparency? Are they being inclusive and so on? If they really get along already before a pandemic type, let's say, occurrence, that challenges the trust, that challenges the knowledge, that challenges the alignment to a vision, well, then communicating through the virtual world will be less difficult because they're already on the same page.
Before we go, can you explain to the listeners for Culture Matters how you go in and do that initial evaluation? Because that will help. You evaluate culture, but you do an initial diagnostic, so to speak, right? It's almost right. Can you kind of touch on that? Because people may not understand. I understand it because I know you, but for the people who don't, can you explain how that works? Well, because someone may say, well, how do you evaluate culture? I mean, can you explain your process? Because it's a pretty interesting process.
Yeah, well, think of firstly, if I'm going to evaluate the culture, I'm firstly going to shadow and spend time with whomever is in ultimate control of the organization. Now, that depends on how large the organization is. But let's say there's an organization where the chief executive officer is still in a position where they're making ultimately all decisions, and there's not a board check and balancing. Like, this period becomes nuanced depending on the actual context of where the company is. But let's just say I'm observing the CEO or the operating principal, who's ever ultimately in control of the organization. I'm spending time with them, and I'm listening to how they relate to other people, how they have conversations and lead the organization with all of their, the C-suite, their partners, and the list goes on. And the reason that's okay, go.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but you say something and I have a question. So to that point, do you think you observing them impacts or changes the way they communicate? In other words, that they may not be fully the way they normally are because you're watching?
So there's two pieces to that. One, it depends on it depends on our relationship. So the more trusting they are with myself, the more likely they'll be themselves. Even with that, though, we all have blind spots, myself included, where our nature will be revealed in interaction. An example, let's say that something arises in the day-to-day, that's a conflict, like a problem arises. Based on the person who's in a position of power's lived experience in life, I call it a TDM. It's like time and space stops, and all of a sudden they're not even present anymore. Maybe they're freaking out about something, and they kind of come back and they're like, oh wait, we all have blind spots, and we reveal our nature in those blind spots. And so I'm observing and shadowing. So to answer your question, it's a bit of both. There will always be a level of influence, but that's, of course, the onus is on someone in my position to be able to understand the whole picture, gather information, and then present a thesis, essentially an analysis, to then have that dialogue with the person in power so that they can become, let's just say, a better leader. What does that even mean? More constructive communicator, more clear on the vision, more aware of their blind spots, and all of the transparency and inclusivity and value transference What's value transferred? It's like how people actually act in the workplace. You'd be surprised how much influence the operating principle has on the culture of the workplace, just how they behave as people. Right? Teaches people how to behave. So
Okay.
I hope that helps, at least through
Yeah,
that
it does.
in that direction.
It does. So I'm trying to make this almost like
The smaller the company too, the more like that, the behavioral evolution, let's say from deconstructive conflict to constructive conflict, deconstructive communication patterns and behaviors to constructive communication patterns and behavior of the CEO has a huge impact on how quickly the organization innovates and taps into its potential for profit. You know, that's organizations, you know, in the small cap and below, less than 2 billion in market capitalization, shares outstanding times share price and below. You know, they may have 1,000 employees and down. That's like the heartbeat of Wall Street in the future. Like those organizations are going to become the Apples of the future. And
right.
their CEOs and their education levels, their emotional capacities can make or break the success of the organization. And of course, how people, this goes back to the beginning of the conversation, how is the pandemic or external conflicts changing or revealing culture? Like ultimately, how are the people doing? How are the employees doing? How is that affecting the innovation and the profit of the organization? Well, what about the customers? So I can go on, but
Okay.
I love this stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I know. So I want to go back to the process. You follow them, right? And I'm trying to keep it to a simple formula for people who may not work for a company with 1,000 employees, right? Maybe they only have 10, maybe they have 20. But so you evaluate the culture, right? You do an initial evaluation. Then what? Walk me through a step. Can you do it through a step by step?
The culture puzzle is an analysis.
Culture puzzle. Okay.
Yeah, the culture puzzle process is firstly a shadow of the operating principle. I have a way of understanding what people are not aware of based on the words that they use in the order of their language. I guess you could call it a linguistic analysis or something of that nature. I've taught myself, but and tested it with obviously argument and open dialogue with the actual client partner in this case, right? Like, so it starts with the shadow and then it becomes a book, like a process. We're actually creating a book that will reveal wherever their level of leadership is at. And
Can you define what a client partner is? Because people may, again, you know, and I know, but people listening,
sure.
I mean, we have to almost like define every step because
yeah, I mean, in my mind, for me to, I had the various theories of culture for various reasons, and I thought, I better prove it in a sense, or at least try to disprove it, as like Popper or the scientific method, right? To disprove it, to see where I'm wrong. So the idea was, don't need to work with a lot of businesses to figure out if you're onto something or not. You've got to study. You got to get your hands dirty. You got to get in the trenches. So as opposed to being a transactional organization at this stage of our, or, you know, in the prior years, our growth, where we work with hundreds of companies all at once, or sell, let's say, a product or a service all at once, and that's a different model. We decided to kind of turn that around on its head and filter out, you know, interview hundreds of companies and only pick handful. And that the language partner, client partner, it came after that. So first is the filter. It's like I'm interviewing hundreds of people and figuring out who makes sense, and do I make sense to be this person of cultural cultivation and curation, right, with the client. So client partner sprung from that filter. So a handful of organizations that we've been working with for years behind the scenes in various industries, we consider them our client partners. And the idea, like I said, or I'll go back just to be super clear about this, the inspiration behind that was so that I could pursue my research around culture in a way that was that maintained the fidelity of the pursuit of like, is this actually a useful product or service? Right? What the results have to speak for themselves, kind of thing. So we're evolving into more where we'll have clients, right? Various product offerings for the general populace that won't have the opportunity, or vice versa for me to shadow them for a period of time and write a book about them. And so does that help clarify that a bit? Like client
It does.
partners is how we view those that we've served and grown their organizations with them.
So, okay, so go back to now we're to the pandemic issue.
Sure.
Now people are working from home. How do you do your assessment when people are all over the place? Do you interview them on Zoom, or how does that work? Because I know that you would go into when they had bricks and mortar, you would go in there and you follow them around. What if you can't follow them around? What do you do?
Well, I've gotten smarter and more educated as I've gone.
Mm-hmm.
And not, I would argue that there's there's levels of how involved someone in my position could be. In that specific scenario, we actually traveled hundreds of thousands of miles in the air in those years, because myself and my partner Jenna Silverman, we had deep dialogue around how are we going to approach this time. Having believed in the possibility of us, let's say, getting sick, based on our own risk tolerance, we decided to travel and to physically meet with people and to lean into the physically the conflicts, and we, there was explosive growth at the result of that. So I just want to at least be clear about what actually occurred in that circumstance. And there were people that were open to that, and they invited us to physically meet with them. Can a big portion be virtual? Absolutely. And there's many ways to impact the culture. So that would be but the culture puzzle process I would do in person. And that, let me be clear, that is not something that I, number one, can do with many organizations, nor would I posture for that to be something everybody should be pursuing with me. However, I've been working for some time on product/process deliverable services that someone that doesn't have access or just can't happen, where we could do a culture puzzle process, can increase their level of awareness and education around culture. What is culture? How valuable currently is their culture, and so on and so forth. And we're working on that now. I don't know if it's a bit preemptive to talk about it, although this probably won't go back for a bit, but I don't know. Does that help?
Yeah. And
I mean, if I have a conversation with someone like this, like through the show, let's use the show, for example, the podcast. I'm making decision through when I have a guest. I'll have a deep understanding about who they are as a person because I've listened. And there's once you have that level of education, there's inferences you can make around how they behave in conflict and outside of conflict with their people, with their customers, with their partners, and so on and so on and so on. And I use those inferences to decide who I'm going to pursue to potentially work with. So that same, if I were to be, let's say, if someone that met me with me virtually said, your firm would be helpful to be with us on our journey. Mm-hmm. Just from an hour conversation, 90-minute conversation, like an interview, I could give them, we could start a pretty healthy conversation around what may or may not be their blind spots in leadership. And that was as a result of my own innate gifts, and as well as skills developed over time when it comes to the agglomeration of disciplines that I've studied to be a cultural advisor. So yes, there can be great progress through virtual based on just where people are as leaders. And that really comes down to the questions that I ask and how deep we go into the actual company and what its makeup is. At this stage in our evolution, that's not something I've pursued, meaning like have just virtual consultation in the beginning. Not that I'm opposed to it. It's just it started with the permission to do the culture puzzle process, which that's a book. Like that takes 3 to 4 months to create. There are biweekly virtual advisory calls within that where it's a multidisciplinary approach, part therapeutic, part Socratic, part let's say curriculum. Like there's a curriculum. So
Stop the recording.
okay.
Okay, so we just had a timeout. Jay is so passionate about culture that I interrupted him with a timeout. So if you saw me do the timeout sign, so we're going to try to do simple better, simplify some of those answers because I have so many questions. So this is unedited, right? We're live in front of a studio audience, and so
The only way it should be.
my friend, he loves his stuff. He's great at culture, and I have a bunch of other questions. So if we could jump into it. So we went from people working from home, right? Your what a client partner is, how you do the culture puzzle, right? And I asked you about people, CEOs not being their authentic self because you're listening, right? It's like anything else, right? They may not be themselves, but you said, and I wrote this down, you said there's many ways to impact a culture, right?
Yeah.
Are you talking about in general or culture matters?
What do you mean?
Well, are you saying that you can go in and impact the culture, or there's many ways for a business to impact its own culture, or both?
Yeah, both. Business has. The reason I said that was to specify we're talking about business culture right now, not like our nation's culture or
Yeah, I'm not
family
talking about business.
dynamics, because I can speak on all of those, and we do work in the family setting, and so on and so forth. So I was speaking more business context, the relationships between the authorities and the subordinates, if we're going to oversimplify.
Okay, now you just said something. You said families.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that. So it's not just business, it's families.
Family dynamics impact business dynamics.
Okay, that's phenomenal. Are you talking about a family-owned business?
Whether it's a family-owned business or not, the family dynamic of all parties in a business will affect how people show up to business. Example, an employee of an organization will be maybe more likely to be involved with a business if the business creates a safe, inspiring, constructive place for that person, because their home life isn't giving that. That's one of the most empowering, meaning creating, providing elements that a business can give to employees is a home, and as well as negate an employee's home life by making their work life so difficult it actually starts undermining their home life. Right? It goes both ways. Same with leadership. My theory about it is that the family dynamic of the ownership has a causal relationship with the equity, with the organization. If the operating principle, the CEO has a self-destructive home life, the likelihood that they're going to translate that type of irresponsibility and so on and so forth to their leadership and employees is extremely high. I mean, why would they be selfless in the marketplace when they're selfish at home? So they bridge, and yeah, is that helpful?
No, I love this, and so and I think probably a lot of your listeners are going to be relate to this, right? They have stress at home, they bring it to work, right? They bring it to work. And it's not just the CEO, right? Anybody could bring in stress, right? Is that right?
It
And
translates below awareness, even if it doesn't
okay,
come to the point where the person is thinking about it consciously. And when someone goes home, they work at a company that, let's say, is in a state of culture that is not creating constructive communication, constructive, productive behaviors towards aims, goals, and desires, the employee will start to repress that, and they may start venting at home to their spouse,
okay.
or they
So,
may not, and then they may hit the bottle or do something else, and then they start destroying their spousal relationship. So yeah, all that nuance and all that complexity is where I live, and I try to help the organization do a better job, ultimately because it creates more profit and innovation. It's not just some woo-woo thing. It's what's the profit, what's the productivity, what's the innovation. If we have an arrogant organization, we're eventually going to go out of business because we don't have innovation. Innovation comes from the actual mental faculties of all the people that get together to create the organization's success. You can make profit for a few quarters, you can make profit for a few years in a good, upswing time where money's cheap, but it's not sustainable. And so, that's
okay, so I'm going to go back to, I'm going to stay on this issue because I love this. So from a culture matters perspective, from a strategic perspective, and to resolve that, okay, you go into a company and you find out that the CEO is bringing in stress from home. Is that outside your scope, and how do you deal with it? Because you can't really control that, right? It's happening. So what do you do? Because
for me specifically, I listen and help them through it. I mean, ultimately, that is a result of underlying philosophies, past resentments, unreconciled behavioral habits, like habit type behavior, and so that's an important piece to start aligning, so that the person, first of all, has a more meaningful existence in this, their pursuit of whatever power they're looking to get from their business.
Have you ever had it happen? And if so, can you give us an example without?
Well, I can't talk about anything specific because of the confidentiality that comes with the type of work that I'm specifically responsible for. But theoretically, that theory came before the pursuit of building Culture Matters as a firm to help companies grow in a way that was meaningful. So that's as much as I'll say. That I'm not going to use any examples or specifics, because then it'd be coming from actual experience that I'm not going to undermine the real relationships I have with real people that are really growing every day for some invisible audience, right? To just get my own self looking like.
Right. Give us an example of the hardest, the most challenging culture you've faced. And again, no name, but what was the situation and how did you handle it?
Well, so I can't speak about specifics because of the role. Like,
no, who you're talking about.
Either way, if somebody was going to retain us,
yeah,
like to be a professional firm, you don't exist in a sense. So even to do this, right? Even to do this, it has to be focused on this, as in present before the crowd the thoughts of someone that does the type of role that I do and that we do as a firm and an organization. There's a level of risk that comes with it.
Okay, I'll rephrase it. I'll rephrase it.
It's still
I'll rephrase it. No, I'll rephrase it. Understand, respect that.
It's a fair question too. It's not, I'm just
no, I understand, but I'm going to rephrase it. I hope I rephrase this properly, because this is very interesting, very interesting. What would be the top two challenges to a culture that you have faced, that you can face, potentially will face?
Yeah, and by the way, like, I could speak from this theoretically, because everything that I have pursued and that our firm has become was based on theories that I came up with that I wanted to test in the marketplace with actual business, not just be in a school writing on a wall, but working in the field. So we're speaking theoretically. I'm facing everything I'm talking about in various ways.
Yeah.
So the general difficulty that comes with growing a business is the people that start organizations, they have the motivation, which comes from a dark place. They seek control. They seek power. They may lack the education.
Explain dark place, because that's a pretty good statement. What does it mean? Like when you say comes from a
Things
dark
happen
place,
to us in our lives. Things happen to everyone in their lives. Some decide to create an LLC, which is how they're going to be perceived by the IRS moving forward as an entity.
right?
And they grow it into a group of people that pursue these subjective aims, goals, and desires that essentially they're just making up based on their opinions. And hopefully there's products that deliver actual objective value in the marketplace, as well as subjective value, how people feel about the products and services. And fundamentally, I would argue all people have some type of chip on their shoulder at varying degrees that is driving them to go, leave their house, put on a suit, become whatever it is that they are represented to in the culture, right? What they do so that they can take care of themselves and their families and their cultures. So when it comes to some of the big, you asked the question, the general conflicts that come with business and interacting and advising CEOs and people in positions of power, having the impetus, the drive, the ambition, lacking the education for the next level, increases the likelihood of anxiety, which would lead to deconstructive type behavior, where they destroy friendships, they destroy people, all the stuff you see in the movies. They're like, capitalism must be evil. I mean, it's how we do it. So I try to bring conscience into the equation. I try to help the organization get clear on why it exists and what it stands for and what it's not going to do. And as a firm, we provide products and services to increase the likelihood of meaning, increase the likelihood of profit, increase the likelihood of innovation, and decrease the likelihood of all the pain and suffering that comes with trying to do something in the world. So a big, that's like.
I'm going to ask you these questions. The next question, to which I already know the answer, but I'm going with something with it. I want to keep, because this is really good. If I said to you on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being most important, 1 being least important, how important is culture in an organization?
10.
1 to 10.
Yeah, 10.
Okay. On a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being very much, 1 being very little. In your experience, again, 10 being the most, you said it's the most, it's very important. And I would agree with you. It's 1 to 10. How much effort and resources and time do most organizations you come in contact with put into building and sustaining a culture on 1 to 10? So you said it's 10. I agree with you. So I'm gonna give you
3.
I'm gonna give you something like per kind of give you perspective. Jerry Acuff has this relationship model, and he asks people, companies, how important are relationships in your business? They do 10. He said, okay, so on 1 to 10, how much time and effort do you put into building relationships? It's like none. Well, if it's a 10, so I'm asking you the same question about culture, because I don't know. I know the answer.
Here's my answer.
I don't know the answer to the second one. So
the answer 10, is less than 3. However, it hasn't. Those that do it, I would argue, ironically, the efforts undermine the culture. Example, chapter 3 in the next book. Culture doesn't work when the values are weaponized. So external parties come in, to get clear on the values of the organization, and then the ownership uses them as weapons. You're not living this value. That is ironic. That is the opposite of the value of the values. The value of the values is to live them, not tell the other person you're not living them. So those that do invest in culture is horrifying to watch. And so the answer is less than 3. It's very low. However, it was not necessary, because when we talk about culture, we're just talking about business, but we're calling it culture because today in our modern culture, the world that we're in, it matters. It's becoming, there's lots of complexity to that. So I would say less than 3, and it wasn't. Yeah, that's my answer.
Okay.
Those that do it.
Oh, okay. Now I'm going to take this to the next step. In an organization that has, and I'm going to relate this simply because of my background, then I'm going to kind of flip it to you. People used to ask me about compliance, and every organization had somebody who was in charge of compliance officer, right? Who within an organization ideally oversees the culture?
So it depends on the size, because that becomes more complex the larger the institution is.
Mm-hmm.
The founder, if they're still the CEO,
Mm-hmm.
their behaviors influence how other people behave to a very high degree.
Okay,
And,
but a CEO, again, this is a dynamic, so I'm trying not to interrupt you. But a CEO, let's say a Bradley, right? You and I both been around Brad, and he runs around the business. He goes 100 miles an hour. He's got phone calls and text messages, right? So it may be difficult for him to focus on culture, right? So in a case like
they don't
that,
need to focus on the culture. Their personality is the culture. So if the personality is deconstructed, they haven't learned how to ask questions openly, whether they realize that or not, if they are not honest, which is on a spectrum. Honesty is on a spectrum. If we were all untenably honest, we may have 0 friends, because people are not equal. Some are ugly, some are beautiful, some are tall, short, this, that, like we're all different.
I'm beautiful.
We compare each other. Yeah, Tony, you're perfect. We're equal under culture. We're equal under, we may. So anyway, to answer your question, the behaviors of the operating principle impact the culture at such a deep level, it's actually hard to fathom. It's almost ineffable. However, with that, as a company grows, human resource, right? That becomes a resource to the humans within the organization. And there are constructive ways, proactive ways to benefit from that resource of human resource. And there aren't. Compliance as an inherently, as well, reactive institution to make sure that the organization stays on an ethical boundary, has validity to it. All departments have validity to it. The question becomes, which are inherently reactive, which are inherently proactive, understanding how to group them, understanding how to, for the people to be proactive within reactive systems. Example, marketing is an inherently proactive department. Sales is an inherently reactive department. They're going to be proacting. They're going to be, selling based on what marketing has done. That's an example. Human resource is inherently reactive. The structure, the actual, what it represents in the institution, to the proactive seat, which is the CEO. How that visionary explains where the organization is going, why it's going, and then how they actually model the values in their behaviors. If the CEO is just talking about the values and expecting everyone to change before they do, that will create a repressed, anxious, fear-driven culture.
Somebody listening to this may say, who's the CEO or right, or in charge of a company, maybe listening to this and saying, I think our culture's okay. No one's complaining, right? I think we're good.
Well,
But they don't hear
the
they don't
paradox
hear
is,
they don't hear the whispers, right?
yeah, the paradox is the question would be like, well, you have to ask your COO and your CFO, are you good? And if you're not good, they're going to be afraid to tell you. Therefore, you need external people that are well trained with. It's not just pure intentions, because hell is paved with good intentions. Quite literally. It's well trained. It's and sophisticated enough to know not to go on a podcast in front of millions of people and say other people's personal information. Professionalism of the third party, of the firm, of the advisor, whether it's a coach, mentor, however they go about their services, their level of professionalism, their level of education will impact the company. Like my belief around why advisory firms exist and consultants and coaches and all this exists is because it's checks and balances. You know, when you work for an organization, how you're perceived below awareness impacts the conversation. And an institution has to create open communication feedback loops constantly, and they undermine themselves constantly in spite of the success. It's the success that undermines itself. So having an external, whether it's a coach for a CEO that is professionally trained to be that ear, that conscience, that inquirer, that honest person that wakes up every day and says, today, my job is to get fired by my client. Meaning, because they're in power, they can fire you tomorrow if you tell them the truth and they don't like it. That helps alleviate the suffering of the operating principle, the anxiety. That helps educate them so that they can be a better leader with their people. Someone listening to this might think, dang, like, where do I start? It's a complex question with lots of answers. If you're listening to this still, you're already on the journey in a sense, because you're curious. You know, start with curiosity. Start with pursuing. So that's my short, I'm going to bring it back a bit. Culture is a complex subject. I'm a complex person, therefore I was destined for this work. And it's business, right? People are business. It's a part of business. Products and services, like for the conversations that become about the products and services, people have to be able to communicate and behave with each other in respectful, value-founded ways. And for the smaller companies, that's tough, because who starts the business? It's anybody that wants to start the business. So they have to get the information that they're not going to get in college, because they're not going to college, or they're not going to high school. They're not doing any of these things. They got to learn the hard way. They got to learn from life. And so hopefully there's people out there like me, and there are, that care and try to get them that information that they're not going to get in the institution.
So before we started this morning, I mentioned to you that the head coach of the Northwestern football team was fired because of a toxic culture. And I was surprised when I read it, because he is a name, and he was a name, and it's a great program. And in my mind, I'm thinking, that's just bizarre, right? I think it was like racism and hazing. I think the two things I got to look, but I know that one of those two things at least. And I have to ask you, why in today's age? I mean, because now everybody's offended by everything. Kevin Elko says, "Oh, I'm offended. Everybody's offended." So you really got to be careful. You got to walk the line, especially in the culture, right? In your opinion, why would somebody? I mean, that's almost blatant racism, hazing. Especially they said he knew it was going on, which is mind-boggling to me. Because nowadays, I think you'd have to almost toe the line a little bit more than you did in previous years, because everything's right the way it is. Me Too movement, right? You got to be careful what you say, which I understand. What, in your opinion, why would somebody just turn a blind eye to it? If you can answer that. I mean, you can't speak for him, but I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And it happens all the time. You read it all the time that people, right? In Hollywood, right? You read all these things about the
Well, think of
actresses,
what
right?
type of person
It's all
that you
it's
are.
all culture.
Well, think of what type of person that you or I or the listener would have to be to say, I'm going to risk my everything I have that I've earned and my family's well-being because I believe that this is the right thing to do. So someone has to make a decision to put themselves and the people they love on the line to lose the power they've gained from life. Like maybe everything that's good about a person got them power, got them authority, got them influence, got them responsibility. They did it all right. And then in the position of power, they see something. They have to then choose to lose it all, potentially, for the right thing. That's the question becomes, how many people out of 100 are going to be saint-like, having not dedicated their life to sainthood? And so like I always like to think of it like this: if I was in that position, or if am I going to be the Jay that you know in 20 years when I could do things and get away with them because I have power, influence, authority? And these are big questions. I don't have the answer. I'm fascinated by them, so I'm studying. But ultimately, I would say you'd be surprised what we're all capable of doing, in the sense of convincing ourselves that saying nothing is okay. Like, right? Because let's say someone saw like Harvey, that guy, he was doing all sorts of weird things to women.
Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah. So you work your whole life to get to a certain position of success. Maybe you have to choose between paying your mother's home rent or house mortgage and telling the truth about Harvey. You're afraid to lose your job, which means your mom's gonna, end up destitute. So now you're thinking, well, let me just say nothing. Someone else will handle it. Life is complicated. So I would say, think of, I don't know. That's
No. We're going to, this is very interesting. I know we're gonna run out of time, but I got 4 minutes. I want to ask this question. This has popped in my head, but I want you to answer it if you could. Somebody comes to you and says, I don't want you to necessarily evaluate, let's say it's a year-old company, a 2-year-old company. They come to you and say, look, here's what I want you to do. Culture matters. I want you to teach us how to build a culture. It is what it is. I don't want you to value it. But I do want you to help us. I want you to tell me, what do I need to do? What do we need to do as an organization to have the strongest culture possible? How's that work? Can you do that? I mean, is that an option?
Yeah, I would.
Because what you do now is you evaluate where they are versus where.
Well, so there's something I've been testing that seems to have a positive outcome for groups, increasing communication, which thereby increasing productivity and profit. And that's collaborative dialogue. So there's a book they're going to get that facilitates a process where, let's say, they get together for their weekly meeting with the leadership. And this book will have questions that they're going to be able to ask and have dialogue with one another. That seemed to help the increased communication that arguably will come before, let's say, a more open, inclusive, transparent culture. But that's just a piece. But I'm experimenting with that.
Can you quickly touch on we're going to do a part 3 inevitably, right?
I'm in.
Yeah. So, but can you just give us an overview of what the book is?
Yeah. So think of it like, how many people do you hear about say, team meetings suck? We're having too many meetings.
Yeah.
We're going to have more meetings the less honest we are in the meetings.
Repeat that. Can you repeat that?
We're a culture will have more meetings the less honest the meetings they have are.
That's fascinating.
The less likely, the less open inquiry that is occurring from top down, the more things are held back. The more information is held back at the bottom and middle. The more information that's held back at the bottom and the middle creates less questions from the top. It's catching a falling knife. The company is going down in value and the revenue might be going up like crazy for a bunch of other factors, but the company is near bankruptcy. The partners want to kill each other. Everybody is just not in a good place. So how do you create that open feedback loop? Well, I'm trying to figure out a way to do that at a higher scale than those that we've been able to touch over a long period of time. And one of the things that I found that seems to be helpful, I'm not saying this is a panacea cure-all, but it's a process of inquiry where now there's this medium, this book that will have the questions that have to be asked. And if the leadership is at least willing to dig a little deeper and ask a little more and slow down a little bit, their people will start telling them what's really going on in the organization. Remember, the reason that there's people like me in the world is because power corrupts below awareness and people stop listening to their people. They have all the answers. They have all the answers. They don't have the vision, but they have all the answers. And so that process of dialogue will help increase communication, which will get to the root of the problems. More likely, not all, not a panacea, like I said, but that's something.
Okay. We're out of time. So we're going to, that last part was powerful. The last 30 minutes was really powerful. So we will adjourn now and join you, and I will schedule part 3. And
I mean, wait, let's just say, Tony, right here, you influenced the power of this because you told the truth. You're like, Jay, let's here's my feedback. And I'm like, yeah, what is it? I want to know. And we made this show so much better because you have helped me today. And so that is an example.
Well, I've got about 30 more questions for you. So
you made this better today because you decided to tell the truth. And I am open. I want to learn. I want to listen. I need to work through my own emotions and not be egotistical and insecure. And you helped make this a better show today because,
well, thank you.
So there you go. That's the example. This is what a relationship does. It creates value. You made me better today.
What's the last thing you want to say to your listeners as we log off for part 2?
Listen to every episode of Tony Capullo on the Culture Matters podcast. Yeah, because it's good stuff.
Thank you, Jay.
Yeah.
Well, sounds good.